Hi, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours with AvaTax. I'm Ted Spence. I manage the AvaTax API team. And today I have with me John Sallese, who's one of our specialists in the field of Nexus. And we're going to be talking about Nexus, which is an incredibly finicky topic, isn't it, John?
It's a finicky topic, and it is definitely a topic that changes a lot over time. I mean, a lot of people just have a lot of misunderstandings about it. So it's always great to kind of go back to basics and kind of talk through it.
Yeah, and so what I want to mention here is AvaTax as a product has a lot of ways that we can help. And so what we'd like to do is we'd like to spend our time today, and we'd like to go through a variety of different ways that AvaTax can make Nexus easier. So just to mention, if anyone's interested, we have our annual tax professional conference, which is called Crush. This year it's in Washington, D.C. If you're interested, both John Sallese and I will be there. We'd love to meet you and talk to you about your company and your tax problems. But we also have this fantastic developer site, which I'd like to point out. We have a lot of information here about Nexus. So what I'd like to start off with is, John, did you know that we have an API call called List Nexus by Address? Were you familiar with this?
That's a good question, Spence. Actually, I haven't been. I typically, when I'm dealing with Nexus, because I deal more on the tax side of things, I'm usually inside of our UI managing it. But, that's probably not the best option for a lot of customers, especially if you're, needing to address that maybe in another system outside of using our admin console.
Yeah, so why don't we start off by just giving everyone a definition of what a Nexus is and why this would be helpful? Would you want to take a quick stab at that?
Sure. So ultimately, Nexus is, for the easiest way to describe Nexus for everyone on the phone here is, just because you're shipping into a state, so just because somebody's buying something and you're shipping product to a certain state, doesn't necessarily mean you should or should not be calculating taxes there. In order to figure out if you are required to calculate taxes in a state, you need to figure out if you have Nexus there, which is a kind of, it's kind of a tax term, but all it means is, hey, do you have enough physical presence in a state to actually have to calculate taxes there? Do you have Nexus there? And it's the fundamental question, and most companies go into our system where Ted is right now, and they actually can show how to set Nexus up in our system based on the settings for your account. It's one of the most.
I'll click along with John just so that you can follow along with what he's talking about. But I'm going to go to the AvaTax website and I'm going to click Settings. And I believe, John, what you're talking about is this first item right here: manage where you collect and remit tax, right?
Exactly, and it's one of those fundamental things that if you're calculating taxes for a company, you really need to know where you're registered, because you don't want to calculate taxes in a state unless you're registered there, and that is specifically what this is all about managing.
And I know that I've talked to the people who designed this website, and the word Nexus is a term of art that a lot of novices just don't recognize. They don't know what it means. So at Avalara, we help both big companies, big enterprises, and we also help small mom and pop shops. We help food trucks. We sign up people who have, local corner stores. And what you do is you walk them through this by calling it where you collect tax, manage where you collect tax. And so the term of art for this is Nexus. But, John, how would somebody go in and add a new state here?
If you're calculating tax, in this example, if you're already calculating taxes in, let's say, California, and you determine that, hey, you know what? The state of Washington really wants me to calculate taxes. And so now I need to turn on the state of Washington, basically, because unless you're telling us you're registered there, we're not calculating. So exactly, you need to go to that Add Region button, click on that. And then simply to turn on Washington, you just need to scroll down, click on the box right there, and hit Save. And now we're going to be calculating taxes in Washington.
Great. So now I've set up Washington. Oh, wait a minute. Why does it say February 13th here?
Good question. because you're only supposed to be calculating taxes when you're registered there. So if you're in an accounting system or a billing or any sort of e-commerce system that's calculating taxes, you want to only calculate from the point in time you're registered forward. And we make all that stuff date sensitive because if you do credits and reversals from prior periods, you want to make sure you're applying the rules so you're not crediting taxes back that you never collected.
Gotcha. So here's where I'd like to jump in and add something. Adding Washington is really easy. But what happens if you decide you want to add Colorado? Well, the problem with Colorado is, as John well knows, Colorado has both the state jurisdiction and local jurisdictions. And you need to know which local jurisdictions you're collecting in. And if you don't register properly, then you could be collecting tax that you're liable to remit or something like that. So this is the reason that we created the list nexus by address. This API call right here is intended to simplify the challenge of what should I do in Colorado. So like, John, when was the last time you've been to Colorado?
I go to Colorado probably a couple of times a year for work. And there's a lot of tax locations in Colorado, or taxing jurisdictions, I should say.
Where'd you visit?
I visited Denver, Colorado, which is where we
Where did you stay in Denver?
Ooh, man, I always
You don't have to name the hotel because that's kind of an endorsement, right? I don't know if John Sallese endorsement violates any of our confidentiality clauses, but just pick a Starbucks or something that you've seen.
I'm not afraid to say it. I usually stay at Marriott hotels, and the hotel I stay at is the Courtyard downtown when I'm there.
Let's see if we can find it.
That's right. You can close enough.
Okay, so here we go. Courtyard by Marriott downtown. All right, where's the address? Doesn't Google usually show? Oh, here we go. So at this point, the idea is if you're declaring Nexus here, so let's say you opened up a little shop right next door at the Courtyard. And so you've got this address right here, 934 16th Street. The purpose of this list nexus by address API is that it will tell you which jurisdictions you are actually in. So let's type this value in. Denver, CO.
You've done this before.
Maybe just once or twice. You know, it's like the hair club for men. I'm not only a developer, I'm also a client.
Hair's overrated.
Hair's overrated, oh boy. So here's what happened is I submitted this address. I told AvaTax that I have this address right here. Now we use the exact same logic that we use to calculate taxing jurisdictions. We use the exact same detailed map that we use to calculate your tax, but instead what we're doing is we're telling you you've got Nexus in these jurisdictions. So first of all, we tell you that you're within the state of Colorado. Then secondly, we tell you that you're within the city of Denver. Then, it's a little bit hard to see this, Denver Area Transit. TR usually means transit, right?
Yep.
So this is what's called a special taxing jurisdiction. This is actually an area that I've asked our API developers to work on. We use acronyms internally, but we're working to make the API more friendly. So we're actually preparing an iteration of our API that replaces the character STJ with the fully spelled out word special tax jurisdiction. We will, of course, keep backwards compatibility. So the old field will stay there, but we'll add a new field that will be the same thing, just properly spelled out. Could you tell people what is a special taxing jurisdiction?
So a special taxing jurisdiction is any jurisdiction that's smaller than a city, is what I say. Usually so when you think of taxes, they're usually administered at the state, county, or city level. But then there's a bunch of other little taxes they call district taxes or special jurisdiction taxes that are smaller than an actual city. And those are the hard ones to figure out, right? That's why you need the street address to actually know where those addresses are, because ultimately you want to make sure you pick up the correct rates when you're actually calculating taxes.
And so if you look at our AvaTax website here, what you'll see is a whole lot of little jurisdictions that are drawn in interesting ways. There's like a little
Yeah.
purple jurisdiction right here next to Bomar. There's one up here, little tiny little section right there. That's crazy stuff, but it happens.
This is really unique to Avalara too. We actually have, and Ted is out on one of our public facing sites, and you'll notice we actually have little colors that represent little district taxes. So again, kind of gives you a visual representation of it, so that if you don't have the street address but maybe a GPS coordinate, you can actually figure out what the actual tax districts need to be. This is hugely helpful when you're a retailer and you're opening up new stores in new locations. It really helped me anyways when I was in practice. It helped me figure out where I needed to think about registering.
Yeah. And so programmatic, like you can use this tool as a human being. You can browse around and you can look at this. But the moment that you want to write a program to do it for you, this is the API that does the job. So at this point, it'll tell you that you're within the Denver Area Transit District, you're within the Denver Metro Culture District, and of course, you're also within the United States as a whole. And Nexus declarations of the United States, were you aware that these are now being used to calculate cross-border taxes?
I was.
Well, of course, but you know everything. I mean, come on, John. Be nice. We've got customers on this call, and
yes.
you know they all need a little bit of walkthrough. So we've been adding some features into AvaTax that help calculate cross-border taxes. We have an upcoming webinar where we're going to be talking more about cross-border. So take a look for it. If you go to our developer site, and if you go under Resources Webinars, you'll be able to see an upcoming webinar on Thursday, February 22nd, that will include Amy Morgan to talk about cross-border taxes.
You know, not to diminish the importance of this API call you're doing, but I really see that API call as very useful in situations where you're setting up marketplace sites. Do you know what, is that a term everyone's usually from? I call them marketplace sites, but it's when you have a website set up where vendors can log onto the site and basically put their items out that they're looking to sell through another website. Is that kind of how you talk about it, Ted?
Yeah, totally. And in fact, there's a lot of nuisances with marketplace nowadays. You know, one of the biggest problems is that if you use your marketplace for fulfillment, then you have to declare Nexus in every jurisdiction where the marketplace has a warehouse, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It depends how they set it up, but that is one of the problems. But ultimately, you also have to worry about the nexus of the marketplace site, and you also have to worry about the nexus of the customer putting their items on that website. And so you need an easy way to get that information presented to the user without them having to log into our system and start checking a bunch of boxes, right? That's what's really nice about this. You can actually pull it into the vendor, and the marketplace experience for that vendor doing the setup is very important to a lot of marketplace websites. So being able to customize that experience for them is actually very beneficial.
Great. So part of what I should mention is that this list Nexus by address API, the results you get back from it, you can pass to the create Nexus API, which is how you would then go about declaring Nexus in these jurisdictions. So if you're opening up a new office and you call list Nexus by address, you'll get a list of Nexus for that address. Then you could call create Nexus and declare them, and it will help you out.
Oh, awesome. So it'll actually set it up. So instead of you're removing the need for people having to log into our system to do any setup. It'll all happen automatically through the marketplace facing website, for example.
Yes, indeed. That's exactly what this is for. So this API that we've just described is actually what happens when you click on these checkboxes. If you were to click the checkbox for Nevada, then underneath the hood, as soon as I click add these collection authorities, what it's doing is it's calling create Nexus. It's using the Nexus definition for Nevada, but then it's passing it to the create Nexus. So one thing that's worth mentioning is that this screen is built using a slightly different API. So let's go ahead and look at what that is. This API is called list Nexus by address, and it will take the address, like the Courtyard by Marriott that I looked up a few minutes ago. But then there's a different version that just says list Nexus in general. And you can use this, and it will give you a list of everything Avalara knows about. You could also filter it. You could say, region equals Nevada, actually it's NV, right? So I pass this API and, oh, there it is. There's the Nevada Nexus. So this API just gives you the ability to browse around and search for the Nexus that you want. What's happening right here on this screen is that we've called list Nexus for the United States. And then we've displayed everything on the screen that comes back from that API call. And then whichever things you check, we pass it to create Nexus. So that's how we build AvaTax. It's worth mentioning, like, we don't hide any of our APIs. The team that builds this website, they use the exact same APIs that we document to customers. So there's nothing that they do that you couldn't do yourself. And I think that's pretty cool. I think that's something we do that a lot of other companies don't.
That's very unique to us. And again, it really comes out when you're dealing with marketplace websites, because you can customize and create the entire tax logic a customer needs to use without ever having to log into our site. It makes the setup much easier.
Yeah. Well, we've gotten a ton of great customers through your hard work, John. And one of the things we should probably do is, I've talked enough. Why don't we pause and take some questions from the phone?
Okay.
Looking at Jeff Meisner over here. Jeff is asking me, what is the difference between sales and seller's use Nexus? Oh boy, that's an interesting one.
Oh yeah, it comes up a lot when that's the tax person in me is coming out a little bit as I explain this, but the ultimately what it is sales or seller's use tax. It's two separate tax classifications, and it sort of addresses if it's an intra or an inter-state transaction. And why do we care? We care because the rate could be different, and it could need to get filed on a separate return. So, for example, I think you're going to be showing, you're going to be pulling up some addresses there, Ted, to show it, or I can certainly talk through it a little bit. Typically,
where would you like me to pop out? What could I look up for you?
No worries, you're good. You're good. Typically, we look at the ship from and the ship to address, and we determine, is that an intra or an inter-state transaction? And then based on that type of transaction, we determine if it's a sales or a seller's use tax that applies. Now, from an IT perspective, right, you're just getting a rate back. But we always want to make sure we're getting the right rate back. And that's how we use those addresses to figure out if it needs to be sales or seller's use, so that we can make sure it lands on the correct tax return when we file it.
Totally. So anyways, I'd also like to take this moment to call out Jeff Meisner. Jeff has been helping facilitate these calls for a long time. Thank you, Jeff.
No problem. Thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate you feeding these questions to me. It looks like you're handing me another one. The question is, why can't I just call tax rates by address? Oh boy, that's a good one. Let's take a quick moment, John. I think this one has probably given you an aneurysm right here. But we have a free API call called tax rates by address. Why can't I just call this API and just determine the tax rate by address and be done?
Well, that's a good question, and I actually get that question a lot of the time. Tax rates have their purpose, but there's three things customers want from us. Customers want the correct tax rate, which they can certainly get through this API, but you know what? They might not be getting the correct tax rate when they're just looking, because you might be getting just the sales tax, not the sales or seller's use tax. And we're also not looking at the product or service taxability when we're getting that, which can be really important to determine if that service or product is actually taxable in the state, and you should be applying that rate to it.
Yeah, actually, let me point out here, in the documentation right here, we call out some of the things that are going on, and we specifically cite that even though you may get the tax rate for a particular address, you could be selling food or clothing or machinery that has a different tax rate. You could be selling to an exempt customer. You don't want to charge tax to a customer if they're exempt.
Exactly. And you're looking for someone to help manage all that information as it changes over time too. And that's exactly why customers use us.
Oh, and that's a really good point. I know we haven't talked much about this, but let me just sidetrack a little bit. This is something that I tell to developers a lot. I'm curious to know if you have this in your interactions with customers too, John. part of the reason people say, they come to me and they say, wait a minute, why do you return $0 for taxes in New Mexico? And I say, well, it's because you haven't declared Nexus there. Yep. And they say, well, why can't you just calculate taxes for me everywhere in the country? The answer is, well, if I calculate taxes for you everywhere in the country, every dollar of tax you collect, you have to remit, and you have to register in each of these states.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? If you do want to calculate taxes everywhere, you can there's a button which I'm sure you can show where you just actually it'll turn on at Nexus everywhere, right? If you wanted to do that, you certainly could. And there are very limited reasons why people want to do that. I mean, I do have some customers that do that. And the reason they do it is they know whenever they sell something, they know they're going to be sending somebody on site to do the installation or the implementation or what have you of whatever's being sold. And in that limited use case, which is a very limited use case, yes, some customers turn on taxes across the US, and we actually have some really great reporting in the background that'll flag those transactions and let you know, hey, there's no return for this to go on to. You need to register and start filing taxes there. But again,
yeah, and I'd like to take a moment to pitch our return service. This is one of the great things is if you declare Nexus in a jurisdiction, we're going to prompt you. We're going to say, hey, look, you need to report something. Go ahead and set it up. Please report it. And this is just one of those great things. You can pay Avalara a small amount of money for each filing, and we'll do all of the hard work for you.
Exactly, and a lot of companies like that because we'll be flagging the transactions. We'll let you know, hey, this tax amount doesn't have a home, it doesn't have a return it needs to fall onto, and from there you can go ahead and register, and we can actually file those tax. Or actually, Avalara can help you register and file those taxes for you. That's definitely an option. But typically, customers don't want to calculate taxes in a state unless they're registered there. And that's where those check boxes come in that, you know, I don't want to calculate unless you're telling me that you have a license to calculate taxes there, because you're actually calculating on behalf of the state. And the states have very specific requirements they want you to go through before you start holding money on their behalf.
So just quickly, Jeff is flagging me down. There's another customer question here. They're saying, I think I've been collecting taxes in a state where I haven't been registered. What should I do? So what I'd really say is this is actually a very common problem. And we have a team, we have a professional services team that is very skilled at doing what's called voluntary disclosure, or voluntary compliance. And essentially what they have the ability to do is they can write a letter to the state on your behalf and say, dear state, we're very sorry. We discovered through a routine audit that we've been collecting taxes here. We'd like to file an amended return. Would you please forgive our penalties for this voluntary disclosure? And in most cases, as long as you're being very, upfront and honest, generally the states usually let you get, a one-time free pass, right, John?
Yeah, they'll help. They'll either lessen or eliminate the penalties for you, and they'll basically give you a clean, fresh start going forward. Yeah, I run across that a lot with companies when I'm doing business with them. That's usually why they're contacting me. They're either calculating in states that they've never registered in, and they're just trying to figure out what to do with that money.
Yeah, and I just want to mention, none of this is guaranteed. I know I've been told that it's something you can ask for, but it really just depends on your circumstance, and Avalara is here to help you. So I would like to mention, if you go onto the developer site and you go to support options right here, we'll list a variety of different ways that you can contact Avalara. If you're already a customer, you can open a support case. If you really want to talk to someone who's a professional, you can contact professional services here. We hire a lot of people who are former state auditors, and they know the ins and outs of what an auditor does and how an auditor is going to look at your data, and they can anticipate some things that will happen. So to the customer who's discovered their collection, this is a great place to start. We hope we can help. We'd love to be of service there.
That's a nice setup. Okay.
So Jeff, any more questions? He's saying no. Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes left. John, is there anything else you'd like to cover on the topic of Nexus?
The only thing I'll mention is that there's a lot going on in this area right now. If you did a quick search online on the word Nexus, you would see court cases constantly going back and forth on this specific topic. And there is a lot happening right now on legislation around it. There's actually some stuff being reviewed by the Supreme Court just on how this is managed, which could affect a lot of customers. So we're staying on top of it, and we'll be sending out notifications on this as definitions around this change.
Gotcha. Yeah, that'll be a big deal. I mean, people have been talking about this for forever. I've been at Avalara for 5.5 years now, and they've been talking about the Marketplace Fairness Act for that entire length of time.
Oh yeah. Marketplace fairness, and then the other one is the Supreme Court's actually reviewing some very specific cases that sort of define how Nexus has always been historically treated. So it should be interesting.
Yeah, well, I know a couple of years ago, Amazon decided that they would change their policy. They used to only declare Nexus in the places where they had an office, and then at a certain point, they just said, "Look, this isn't working anymore. We're going to declare Nexus everywhere." And it's a lot of work. I mean, you file a lot of tax returns, don't you?
Yeah, it becomes a lot. It becomes a lot of work, and at some point, you got to figure out if it's worth it.
Yeah.
So at some point, you're like, do I want to just fight it, or just want to do it automatically? And that's kind of what the court cases are right now, going through. They're challenging sort of the Quill case, which sort of defines how Nexus is typically handled today. And they're going to be possibly, we're not sure what's going to happen, but they're going to be possibly relooking at how they define it, and which could affect a number of customers.
Well, I'd like to mention one other interesting thing about returns, and this was a feature that I had to build because it was in high demand, which is that if you declare Nexus in a jurisdiction, like let's say you were talking about a company a while ago, like a company that was selling boilers or some big industrial machinery, and you'd always send like an installer with them, so you'd have to declare Nexus there. Well, if you don't go back again for a long period of time, the state will still expect you to file tax returns. But we implemented a feature called occasional filing. And the way occasional filing works is that if you have taxes, if you have any transactions in that jurisdiction, it will file a tax return for you. But if you don't, it will wait until the end of the year to file a summary. So if you do one transaction a year, you'll file one return a year. But if you don't have any transactions, it will just file one $0 return for you at the end of the year.
Oh, I got you. Okay. That's actually a nice.
That's permitted in a couple of states. It's only legal in some areas, and depending upon the state's rules, that may or may not be acceptable. But that can certainly save you some money and avoid having to file returns where you don't want to.
Exactly. That's actually a nice feature.
Yeah. So really, let's just sum it up here. Part of what you'll want to do is if you are writing Nexus yourself, if you are building an integration where you're going to declare Nexus, like let's say you are that company that's installing boilers. Well, you could create a service call system, and that service call system would declare Nexus every time you send a person out there to do service. The first thing you'd do is you'd call list Nexus by address, and you'd pass in the location where you were sending the service person out. And then the second thing you would do is you would call create Nexus to declare Nexus in those jurisdictions. And once you've done that, then you would actually go onto the AvaTax website, you'd go into the returns page, and you'd look at all of the different returns that had been calculated, and you would say, all right, I'm going to have to register in these jurisdictions and set up tax filing there. And so if you follow those steps, you can actually use AvaTax, and you can make sure that you're filing taxes correctly in every jurisdiction that you visit.
Hey, great.
Well, and the best part of it all is I'd like to mention that John Sallese is constantly traveling the country, visiting customers, helping them out. And if you sign up for an AvaTax account, there's a chance you could get John Sallese come out to your front door and help you set up.
Oh, yeah.
John, like what sort of magic incantation do we have to use to get you to come help us out?
Oh, you just have to ask. All
Well,
good.
thanks, John. I really appreciate you spending your time with us today. Where are you dialing in from today?
Today I'm actually in Orlando, Florida. I'm
Oh boy.
down here for the next couple of days, and then I'll be going back up to Maine.
By the way, if I can pitch this to you, I'm a guy who grew up next door to Disneyland, and I love Disneyland and everything, but the new Harry Potter ride in Universal Studios is so fantastic, and I've heard that there's one out there in Orlando. Should definitely give it a try if you can break free.
There's a group of us going on Saturday.
Oh, fantastic. Please let me know how it is. I've only been to the one in Los Angeles, and I love it. So thanks again, and I'd like to say thank you again for Jeff for being the facilitator of these calls. Thank you, everyone, and we'll hope to see you at Crush in Washington, D.C. in May.
Hey, looking forward to it. Thanks.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.